After the end of the Civil War in 1865, the Confederate States would be forced back into the Union with the freeing of around 3.9 million slaves due to the adoption of the 14th Amendment on July 9, 1868, giving certain rights to blacks, including citizenship, equal protection of law, and other freedoms. African Americans would still face oppression throughout the United States due to Jim Crow laws. These laws were enacted in the late 19th and early 20th century by white Democratic-dominated state legislatures after the Reconstruction period. It mandated racial segregation in all public facilities in the states of the former Confederate States of America and other states, starting in the 1870s and 1880s. It would be upheld as a law in the Plessy v. Ferguson case of 1896, where the Supreme Court ruled that segregation of public facilities was legal as long as facilities for blacks and whites were equal. Throughout the early 1900s, the Jim Crow laws would be very prominent in the South, especially in the education system. It wasn't until the 1950s that a case would happen not only in the school system, but the nation regarding segregation. This is Brown v. Board of Education. Due to the large Supreme Court case, Brown v. Board of Education would break through barriers of immoral race segregation in schools that would later have an impact on the traditional Jim Crow South, civil rights movement, and African American citizens. During the 1950s, the United States was at war with the Soviet Union, also known as the Cold War U.S. United States officials and Supreme Court justices were aware of the harm that segregation and racism caused to their image, though did little to help the racial tension. The NAACP, a civil rights organization in the United States formed to advance justice for African Americans by the early 1950s, were working to challenge segregation laws in public schools. They filed a lawsuit on behalf of the plaintiff in states South Carolina, Delaware, and Virginia. There would also be many other cases before involving segregation laws, such as Gaines v. University of Missouri in 1938 and Sipewell v. Board of Regents of the University of Oklahoma in 1948. A black third grader named Linda Brown had to walk 1 mile through a railroad switchyard to get to her black elementary school, even though a white elementary school was only 7 blocks away.
I was a very young child when I started walking to school. I remember the walk as being very long at that time. In fact, it was several blocks up through railroad yards and crossing a busy avenue and standing on the corner and waiting for the school bus to carry me 2 miles across town to an all-black school. Being a young child, when I first started the walk, it was very frightening to me. And then when wintertime came, it was a very cold walk. I remember that. I remember walking, tears freezing up on my face because I began to cry because it was so cold. And many times I had to turn around and run back home.
Linda's father, Oliver Brown, tried to enroll her in the white elementary school, but the principal of the school refused. Brown went to McKinley Burnett, the head of Topeka's branch of the NAACP, and asked for help. The NAACP was eager to assist the Browns, as it had long wanted to challenge segregation in public schools. Other black parents joined Brown.
Very strong, dedicated man, and he was always on the lookout for something he could do to help his people. And having gone into the ministry, I think that was really the turning point that made him really want to branch out into the deep water to help his people more. And then going into the NAACP, he was a very strong member in the NAACP at the time. And the NAACP got behind these parents and asked them to go to these different schools to try to enroll their children, which they did. And the outcome was that they couldn't enroll them. They went back to the NAACP, and consequently, the case was started against the school board.
And in 1951, there would be a complaint filed against the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. The U.S. District Court for the District of Kansas heard Brown's case from June 25 through 26, 1951. At the trial, the NAACP argued that segregated schools sent the message to black children that they were inferior to whites. Therefore, the schools were unequal. The Board of Education's defense was that because segregation in Topeka and elsewhere pervaded many other aspects of life, segregated schools simply prepared Black children for the segregation that they would face during adulthood. The board also argued that segregated schools were not necessarily harmful to Black children. Great African Americans had overcome much more than just segregated schools and became very successful. When the case of Brown and 4 other cases involving school segregation first came before the Supreme Court in 1952, the court merged them into a single case under Topeka's name, Brown v. Board of Education. Thurgood Marshall, president of the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, served as the plaintiff's chief counsel. The previous arguments from the district court would be used again in the Supreme Court, as well as the NAACP using Dr. Kenneth Clark's work as an argument with his Dahl test, revealing the consequences of segregating children.
It was an attempt on the part of my wife and me to study the development of a sense of self-esteem in children. We worked with Negro children, now called Black children, to see the extent to which their color, their sense of their own race and status influenced their judgment about themselves, self-esteem. Now, this research, by the way, was done long before we had any notion that the NAACP or that the public officials would be concerned with our results. In fact, we did the study 14 years before Brown, and the lawyers of the NAACP learned about it and came and asked us if we thought it was relevant to what they were planning to do in terms of the Brown decision cases. And we told them it was up to them to make that decision. We did not do it for litigation. We did it to communicate to our colleagues in psychology the influence of race and color and status on the self-esteem of children.
At first, the judges were split when deciding school segregation, with Chief Justice Fred M. Vinson taking the opinion that the decision of Plessy would stand. But before Brown v. Board of Education was to be considered, Vinson died in September 1953, and President Dwight Eisenhower replaced him with Earl Warren, the then governor of California. In the decision released May 17, 1954, Warren argued that the concept of separate but equal has no place in the field of public education because segregated schools are inherently unequal. Thus, the court ruled that the plaintiff was deprived of the equal protection of the laws provided by the 14th Amendment. Warren, displaying considerable political skill and determination, succeeded in drafting a verdict against the segregation of schools the following year, breaking through a barrier of segregation for African American citizens, especially in the Jim Crow South.
Though integration would happen in schools, there would be negative actions against the new integrated African American students.
My name is Reverend Sandra Gourday. I'm originally from Birmingham, Alabama. I was in the 11th grade. I did my 11th and 12th grade year at Jones Valley High School, the old white school, and 9th and 10th grade at the all black school about 2 miles away.
Jones Valley, how was your experience there?
This is a white school.
Yes.
It was very difficult. It was very difficult. I was there with the spitballs. I had teachers that didn't enjoy who didn't want to be a part of the whole integration process. I think that in retrospect, maybe there was one, maybe two white teachers who accepted me and the others who came after me. But as a general rule, it was the second year of integration for that particular school. So it was a new experience for everybody, both the whites and the blacks. And so it was difficult.
The Little Rock Nine was a group of 9 African American students who were enrolled at the Little Rock Central High School in 1957. Their enrollment was followed by the Little Rock Crisis, in which Arkansas's governor, Orval Faubus, initially prevented the students from entering the racially segregated school. It wasn't until President Dwight Eisenhower's intervention that the kids would be able to enter. A year after the Brown versus Board of Education decision, Rosa Parks had refused to give up her seat on a bus and was arrested. Her arrest would spark the Montgomery bus boycott and would lead to other boycotts, sit-ins, and demonstrations, in a movement that would eventually lead to the toppling of the Jim Crow laws across the South. The desegregation of public schools led many blacks wanting equality in other aspects of their lives. This became known as the Civil Rights Movement. The Civil Rights Movement would then lead to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, a labor law that prohibited discrimination based on race, color, religion, sexual orientation, or national origin. It would also allow African Americans the right to vote. Brown versus Board of Education not only ended segregation in schools, but motivated other places and organizations to do the same. Prior to the Brown versus Board of Education case, 17 states required schools to be segregated by race within their borders, and many other states permitted racial segregation of local school districts. The ruling of the Supreme Court ordered the end of all schools which had been legally segregated by race. Today, though there is segregation due to the demographic of students, as well as the class placements, African American kids are able to get the opportunity of an equal education due to the barriers that were broken down with the Brown versus Board of Education case, as well as the Civil Rights Movement. Experiences that you faced, positive and negative, would you go through it again?
Wow. I think yes, knowing that it helps young people like you that to be able to see, even to see my own children and my own grandchildren, not really seeing a big difference between someone who is Asian, someone who is white, someone who's of another ethnic background. I think that it's been worth it to bring us to this point.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Good luck on this project. Thank you.